This is Shrm Radio in partnership with Timber Media, Podcasters for India Inc.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Unabashed, candid conversations on all things talent. In this podcast, we have open, honest and unapologetic conversations about the emergent realities of work, worker and the workplace. I'm Neha Pant, part of the knowledge and advisory team at India, and I have with me Abhijit Bhaduri, coach, talent management advisor and an author. Hi Abhijit, how are you doing?
Oh gosh, I'm blurry-eyed having watched too much of Netflix and read too much of Netflix.
Wow, you have time to watch Netflix. I am really...
I watched this show called The Social Dilemma and I absolutely loved it. And
you did? I think I'm seeing a lot of recommendations for this one, but I've not managed to watch it yet. What is it about?
For everybody who truly believes that, data is only being used for good types. So you just have to watch it and then decide, whether you're being paranoid enough or not.
Right. So let me watch it. Maybe we'll have, in one of the episodes, we should have this conversation, right?
But I also read this fantastic book called No Rules, Rules by Reed Hastings. And this is really, I thought it was interesting whether culture actually, fosters more creativity in the organizations. But I have a more fundamental question, which I want to ask you because...
I haven't read the book so far. I've not had the time.
Which is why I think you should be the right one to answer. So have you read this book called Work Rules by Laszlo?
Yes, that I did like so many years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to sort of talk about the third company. So, I'm going to talk about three companies. So this is Netflix, of course, with this book, No Rules, Rules. And then you have Work Rules, which Laszlo Bock wrote about, what makes Google work, their culture.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's a third one, which is, Basecamp, this company, the founders, Jason Fried and DHH, as he's popularly known as. They have tons of blogs and videos and everything, and they document everything from the time it takes to, post a job and how long people take to respond to it and, how long it'll take, the transparency about the pay scales, phenomenal stuff. And I was just wondering whether culture is something, can companies learn about culture by reading about something as a best practice? Because I personally don't believe in best practices. I think you should create your own, but what do you think?
It's interesting that you asked that question because, we do talk about best practices and, not to say that whatever works for a particular company is going to work for another one. But I think it's about, facilitating that learning in terms of, really seeing what are different organizations doing that is working for them and, taking a leaf out of, their inner workings. Something may work for us, something may not. But then to be able to discern, what works for us and what does not. That's where I think, the role of the leader perhaps comes in. But I don't see a harm in, really looking at best practices, so to say. It may be, a lot used and abused word, but to my mind, I think works because that's how we learn as well, right? We have, we have role models. We look up to people. We, hear from leaders. And what are we doing in that sense? We are learning about...
That is my exact concern that, if you become a company which is eternally, benchmarking others, you will never do anything original in your life because, you are only benchmarking and following. Somebody said you go left, somebody said you go right. And so you will either choose left or right. You'll never think of going diagonally. I think that's one of the first problems of benchmarking. But I think that the culture of an organization is pretty much the personality of the organization. So It's really like saying that, I can look at the way you are and say, okay, Neha is a person who enjoys the outdoors, who goes trekking. I think I want to be like Neha, so I'm going to go outdoors. But if I'm not a person who has ever done stuff outdoors and enjoyed it, just benchmarking you is not going to make me an outdoorsy person. In as much as watching Sachin Tendulkar talk about cricket is not going to make me a cricketer or follow cricket. Because I don't. I'm one of
But do you think a lot of people do that? Because while you gave my example, I also know of a lot of people who said, I don't know how you do this. I am just not someone who would ever, take that arduous climb to a mountain. So I think, it's to each his own, right? And people would get fascinated by some things, but whether they can actually go back and implement that for themselves, to my mind, it's still something that, not everyone's sort of running after. And it's about that ability to discern, right?
But I think one of the first starting points really would be that you need to change the way you are hiring. And most people do not think about hiring adequately when they start. So, or for that matter, when they are really deep set in their practices. So if you want to change, I think hiring is the first place that you would look at, because look at the kind of people that you're hiring. If you want people who are innovators, so do you have people who you've hired who are innovators? And B, more importantly, you have the ecosystem in which innovation can flourish. So if you work with leaders who kill innovation, then I think it is going to be a disaster to hire those people. They'll feel frustrated, they will leave, and they'll spread the word that this, even though you talk about innovation, yours is not the culture which is going to make that happen. So I think I am really deeply against this whole idea of picking up these ideas one from the other. But having said it, three things really struck and it connected so deeply with me, because this whole thing is that you can't run a creative organization by basing it on principles of industrialization. So I think that was one design principle that really worked well with me. And therefore he says that first thing is talent density. So what does talent density mean, Neha? What is your guess from that word? And let me drop a hint. It simply does not mean that you pack your entire team with dense people.
I was just about to say that. Isn't that what talent density is about?
That's what a lot of people may land up thinking. So
Netflix CEO thinks about it differently. So tell us, enlighten us. What does talent density mean?
So talent density is really about continuously upgrading the quality of your talent. And you're not being afraid to let them go once they are no longer, doing what the organization wants them to do. So, I mean, good question is Patty McCord, who was, heading HR and who's for Netflix for a very long time, has been acknowledged generously in the book. Also the person who worked with Reed Hastings to create the culture deck and a whole lot of those policies. At a point of time, I mean, sometime back, Patty McCord also left the organization. So I think not being afraid of letting go of somebody who may have been a fabulous contributor 1 year, 2 years back. I wonder if that kind of a philosophy would work well in the Indian setup, because, we do tend to have a lot of resistance against what we term as hire and fire policy. But this is not so much hire and fire, but, when your work is no longer up to the mark, to let go. That builds talent density. Do you think it would work?
To my mind, it should. But, the way you are describing it...
It's a one-sided expectation of life.
Right.
The word should, the moment you say should, I think it's your one-sided expectation of how life needs to be.
Maybe the world, so the world is evolving, right? And so are organizations. Who knows what's going to happen in future? But from the way things are, looking at this point, perhaps we would soon reach that, point where, there will be more dissent. Now, when you say that when the work is no longer serving you, it should be okay to let go. But then, is it a one-sided contract or two-sided? So will the employer take that call when the organization thinks that the employee is no longer serving, the purpose of the organization? Or the employee also has that privilege to really say that this work is not exciting me anymore, so I don't want to work with this organization.
Yeah, but so when people
you described it earlier, I wasn't very sure if it is two-sided, but, or is it organization's prerogative to, make that decision?
No, I think, again, when people go to work in startups, they expect the fun part of the startup, but they expect the security of an old organization. So I think those are, expectations mismatched. So the more people write about it, but there are, three organizations I kind of want to benchmark very quickly. One is, of course, Reed Hastings' book. It talks about radical candor. So, they don't have a vacations policy. So the first question is, does it mean I could take 12 months of vacation if I wanted to? The answer is no, because then you are really not acting in Netflix interest. So you are just misusing the entire thing. So nobody has a problem letting you go.
You are listening to Shrm Radio in partnership with Timber Media, podcasters for India Inc.
But I want to sort of take you back to another book which, came out a couple of years back. Laszlo Bock wrote this book called Work Rules, where he talked about the, the culture of Google. how it is sort of defined by many of those policies. Some of them don't quite work when you take one particular policy out and replace it in your organization, because the kind of people Google hires, if you don't have that, then there is no point putting that one particular policy, because it's not going to get you to do anything. It's, for example, if let's say you have an organization like Pixar, which looks at a lot of creative people, and you sort of have that in your organization, and you say, people must draw every day. It's not going to make artists out of people. So that's, I'm taking an extreme example to say that many of these cultural pieces lead you to really question the way that you hire. I think that's the first part I would think about. And then there's a third one, but I'll talk about in a bit. But, but what do you think about this whole thing that if you don't fix hiring?
No, I agree. There are a lot of practices that Google's put in place, and a lot of other organizations have emulated. But yeah, of course, to be able to really figure out what works for my culture and what doesn't, that is most important. And the tech companies, the organizations that employ more creative professionals, they have to allow that kind of space for creativity to flourish. There may be certain other industries, where work is more routine and repetitive, right? So what kind of policies would apply to a culture like that would be different, from what works for a Google or a Netflix, right? So again, like you'd asked this question in the beginning, whether the best practices bit works. Wow. My sense is, look at what everyone else is doing, but pick what works for you the best, right? So in that sense, I think it's important that you figure out, where your people are, the kind of work that they do, the kind of people you hire, the kind of intellectual and emotional maturity your workforce has. That's also important, right? You cannot have a blanket policy. And we have had these conversations in our earlier episodes as well, right? That one size doesn't fit all, right? And you
Absolutely.
did taste clusters and identifying different employee types, and what do they value more, and then accordingly looking at what serves my culture best, right? What Steve Jobs did with Apple is not something that everyone can do in their tech companies also, right? So
think about someone like Elizabeth Holmes, who used to call herself the female version of Steve Jobs. So she would wear those kind of black turtlenecks and jeans. And, so she was part of this company she built, which raised a couple of $1 billion, called Theranos, and which turned out to be a gigantic fraud. So I think when you're looking at, the personality of people, you're trying to copy that, in as much as having a tattoo like somebody doesn't make me that person. It's the same thing. The organization's DNA is shaped by the kind of people who are actually there. So then I think this whole thing is, I wonder sometimes that when organizations write books about their culture, it's a phenomenal marketing tool, by the way. And I think that every organization should do it. Not write something which doesn't correspond with reality, because then you tend to disillusion people. But if you think about, a company which I really like the way they use writing and blogging as a way of building their employer brand, this company called Basecamp, which has the founders Jason Fried and DHH, as the guy is called. I mean, they talk about everything in terms of how long it's going to, the delays that are going to be involved when you are hiring. So they would say, we'll take 1 month to, review this, or 2 weeks to review this, and then you'll be called for 4 interviews, then you'll be doing this. When you talk about all the things, in some sense, it's the philosophy of work out loud, where you talk about your style of working. And so you attract the kind of people who relate to that. And I think that's a much smarter way of hiring, and the smart way of building culture.
And when you say that, Abhijit, I'm wondering, there's this famous saying, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And culture is always top down. So when you say that you attract the kind of people you want in your organization, which means as a leader, you have to be, if you're building a creative organization, you have to be creative yourself, you have to be innovative yourself, and you have to have that personality that'll attract your tribe. Is that what you're saying when you, talk about those practices?
If you think about, we don't need to really benchmark only Netflix when you're thinking about building a culture where creativity can thrive. Think about the way in which the advertising industry has actually worked, even in India. If you look at it, they've always had people who are, even within within this culture so you kind of think that questioning the senior is looked at as a mark of being disrespectful. Yeah. And I thoroughly disagree with that, because that's why you'll end up building a culture where nothing original is ever going to come up, because if you don't question something, you can't do something original. Then you can only do maintenance work. Right. So you can just tweak a little bit of what is already there, and then which is why when you think about the Indian ecosystem, there are tons of startups which are copycats of something which has already been done elsewhere. There's a white space which has been identified, and they simply take that idea, give it an Indian name, and they float their own culture and presume that it's going to build a lot of creativity. It doesn't.
Absolutely.
It just doesn't.
Absolutely. When you say that, I'm reminded of, this path-breaking work of Frederick Laloux, and I've been quite inspired by that and how he speaks about, different organizational models. And while he's talking about red, amber, green, and teal, of course, there are,
Okay, can I just stop you for half a minute?
Yes, please.
I think this is a very gender insensitive conversation, because I don't think there's any guy here who's listening to you who knows which color teal refers to. TEAL, right?
Yes,
I only know the spelling of it. I have no clue what teal refers to.
It has use of green and blue, and if you want to know more, then of course you have Google that will help you. But what I was talking about was the different organizational models, and it's fascinating piece of work. Of course, red.
I haven't read that. I must.
No, you absolutely should if you haven't. So it's Frederick, Frederic.
Laloux Prasad.
Laloux is Laloux.
Okay.
All right. So what I was saying was that we were talking about these different organizational models, right? And when you talk about culture and whatever we've just discussed, I think in terms of how different organizational models evolve over time is also something which is important. Now, as he describes these different organizational paradigms, he talks about red, which is more characterized by power. So if you look at organizations which are like a D company or mafia, street gangs, those are the ones where power is exercised to sort of keep people in line and manage people with power, right? Now from there there was the other evolution, which was to amber organizations, and these are the ones which have highly formal roles. Some examples, if you may consider, are of church, military, some of these government agencies, public schools for that matter. Those are that kind of organizations, right?
Very well-defined rules, etc.
Yeah, because stability is something that is valued more in amber organizations, right?
Right.
You move to orange, and which is where most of corporate India is, right now, and for that matter, the corporate world is. Here we are talking about, competition, meritocracy, and so if we look at multinational organizations and some of the charter schools, then that's the kind of organization that they are, the orange paradigm that we're talking about. And then green, we've of course looked at, we know about Southwest Airlines, which are more culture driven organizations. It sort of works like a family. And then we are talking about,
by the way, that's another thing that this guy does. Sorry to interrupt you. Works like a family. He says that an organization, and I so totally relate to that. An organization is not a family. An organization is a team. So he sort of compares it with professional sports.
So while you say that, so green is where the family metaphor comes in, but the teal, which is the next evolutionary, stage, of organizational models. No, that is the metaphor that he uses is a living organism. And what you really, of course, mean by living organism is something which is adapting, right? So, the next model is going to be of those organizations that are evolving with time, that are adapting to change very quickly as and when it happens. And we all know, right, the kind of transitory stage that we are in currently. It's the organizations that are nimble, that are adaptable, that are able to sort of really adapt quickly to this ever-changing environment are the ones that are going to thrive, right? So if you look at it, then but he does talk about the fact that all of these models, who's at the helm? The leader, right? He's the one who's driving the culture, he or she for that matter. Now, here as well, to build teal organizations, which may be, the next, evolutionary model, if the top leadership is not bought into the concept, and if it does not have, those worldviews, it will be very difficult to build an organization like that.
So before you change the organization, think of where leadership is going and the kind of leaders that you have. Because leadership, talent, and culture are the three drivers. I've always believed that, that those are the three things that really make it. But I have only one suggestion, which is that, when people write about colors, etc., they should take colors which are easy for guys to understand.
Yes, please do pass on your feedback to Frederick Lalu. I think he'll be happy to hear from you.
Lalu, if you're listening to it, please do not use...
You read his book, you will know what teal is about, right? So...
use the word...
Don't...
Because, teal... fuchsia, these are the colors which guys...
Okay, women understand these colors very well, okay? All right, on that note, I think we are almost at the end of our episode today. Thank you so much once again for another lovely conversation. I think, we will meet next and talk about another book that, you'll be reading, Abhijit.
I hope that I will get time to read another book. But yes, I think I want to talk about another book, which is, something called Lead, Care, Win, which I'm reading right now, which is by Dan Pontefract. So
right.
I'm going to talk to you about that.
Perfect. I think our listeners have got a few recommendations of some great books to read. But on that note, let me quickly tell you where you can reach us. So shrmindia@shrm.org is the email address if you'd like to send us a query. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Abhijit is also available on all of these social platforms. Abhijit, would you like to share your email address once again if somebody wants to reach you?
Yeah, so my email address is abhijitbhaduri@live.com, LIVE, B for victory, as in live television. And my name is spelled as ABHIJITBHADURI. And that's what you look for on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. You can follow me there. And we'll post a number of things. And if anybody knows what teal looks like, kindly educate me. Along with a picture of what fuchsia looks like.
All right. Until then, everyone, like I always say, keep it unabashed. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you soon. Bye-bye.
This is Shrm Radio in partnership with Timber Media, podcasters for India Inc.